In the wake of the American Revolution, France was in a precarious situation. Due to the enormous debts that dated back to the reign of the Sun King, Louis XVI faced an impending bankruptcy if he could not change the tax system. Spoiler alert, he doesn't. The country descends into revolution, thousands of people lose their heads, literally, a French dictator rises to power, conquers virtually all of Europe, then he loses power, gets exiled, escapes, loses again, then gets exiled again, this time permanently, and then Europe goes back to a system of absolutism from whence it started. So let's look at how the Clash of the Enlightened actually happened.
Release the Kraken!
To understand the situation in France, we have to look at the old regime, the class system that dated back to the Dark Ages. Now, the First Estate consisted of the Roman Catholic clergy. They represented less than 1% of the population, but held around 10% of the land and paid no taxes. Within the First Estate, there were vast differences. For example, the high church leaders were often very rich. However, many other clergy members, such as friars in the various villages, were often very poor. Nonetheless, the First Estate was very powerful. Now, the Second Estate was the nobility, and they contained less than 2% of the population. They paid few taxes, if any, held the highest positions in the army, the government, and the courts, and they controlled almost half the land of France. So now, we go to the Third Estate, which contained around 97% of the population of France. These were the people who paid most of the taxes, and it was so large that they were divided into three different groups. The most well-off of the three were the bourgeoisie, the middle class, made up of doctors, lawyers, shopkeepers, and other professionals. There were also the urban workers who manned the factories and kept the cities functioning, doing remedial work such as sweeping. These people often lived in dire poverty. And then the vast majority were the peasants, making up usually more than 80% of the population. They had to pay rent on their land, they were given the heaviest taxes, and were forced to give 10% of their income to the church. This was known as a tithe. So you can see in this political cartoon that the first two estates were living off of the back-breaking work of the Third Estate. Now we go to the EstatesGeneral, the Estates General. In 1789, King Louis XVI faced very troubling times. There was growing discontent due to overpopulation in the cities, poor harvests due to the Little Ice Age, and massive inflation as well as debt that can be traced all the way back to Louis XIV and his wars and the construction of Versailles. Now, needing to raise taxes, Louis XVI called the three estates to meet in May of 1789 at Versailles for the first time in 175 years. Representatives of each estate were to bring cahiers, or notebooks, listing their grievances against the king and their situation. According to tradition, each estate was to meet and vote separately since each estate received only one vote. Because of this, the Third Estate was usually outvoted 2-1, which explains why the situation was the way it was. Inspired by the Enlightenment and the American Revolution, a clergyman named Emmanuel Joseph Sieyès wrote a pamphlet suggesting that the estates should be organized according to the population. In this way, the Third Estate, which he claimed was a complete nation in itself, would easily outvote the first two estates, which he largely considered to be dead weight. His pamphlet started out by saying, "What is the Third Estate? Everything. What has it been until now in the political order? Nothing. What does it ask? To become something." So, inspired by Sieyès and other revolutionaries, the representatives of the Third Estate declared themselves to be the National Assembly, demanding that voting would be based on heads, not estates. They invited the representatives of the First and Second Estates to join them and not meet separately. In late June, the members of the Third Estate and many from the first two estates were shocked one morning when they found that the door to the main meeting chamber was locked and guarded. Fearing the worst, and due to a rainstorm, they met in a nearby indoor tennis court. Of course, Versailles had just about everything. There they made a collective oath to not separate, but write and adopt a constitution for all of France. Their concerns may have been well-founded, because by early June, French troops, summoned by the king, began to show up at Versailles. This move would spark a revolution.
Your Majesty, I must have a word with you.
The Count de Money. Don't correct me. What is it?
Of course, Your Majesty. I've come on the most urgent of business. It is said that the people are revolting.
You said it. They stink on ice.
No, Your Majesty, this is a very serious problem. The peasants feel you have no regard for them.
What? I have no regard for the peasants. They are my people. I am their sovereign. I love them. Oh! Drifting to the left.
Your Majesty, the situation is worsening. The peasants may grow violent.
Violent, yes, stink. I hate violence. It's the one thing I detest. Violence. I abhor it. Oh! Fell like a stone.